that I would like Jody Williams perhaps to touch on and expand. Just a quick mention, Jody Williams, that since your protest against the Vietnam War, all the way back then, you've been quite a strong peace activist, trying to reclaim the meaning of peace, which you believe, I suppose, goes way beyond the concept of just laying down your arms and absence of armed conflict. So taking what you've heard here today and keeping in mind that there seems to be quite an extent of apathy, indifference in the West, in many parts of the world, about what's going on in Yemen, despite the incredible numbers of killed every day and the destruction that the country has suffered over the past 5 years. What do you think is missing? When we talk about the responsibility of regional powers in starting the war in Yemen and perpetuating it, how do you stop this war? And do we somehow need some kind of a Jody Williams campaign to spur outrage, to get us all out there? Or are governments starting to get it? Are they starting to get it? There is some pressure on the British government and on the US government as well to stop the arms sales at least. Where do you see this heading?
My first response about the regional powers would be echoing my sister Shirin Abadi, but I would say it a little more harshly because I am a harsh person. Throw the bastards out. You know, and then let the people of Yemen figure it out. That's one part. But I have, a couple of things have stuck in my mind as I have listened to everything. And you are correct, I was radicalized by the Vietnam War. I woke up to the fact that my government is a military oppressor. And in various ways, I have fought against the United States military interventions and oppressions ever since. I had a lot of experience in Central America during the 1980s when the US was training and supporting death squads and fun people like that. And I'm going to talk about that in a second. But it was Dr. Dahlia, if I destroy your name, I so apologize. Fahmy, is that right? Near the end of that second panel, she asked a question that to me was fundamental and critical. And it was, okay, you can bring peace, but how do we address the culture of violence? Nobody answered it. I mean, that's a tough one. And then in the previous panel, there was the discussion of at some point all wars end, or the point being made, and that's true. But then there was another point, which was how. And I think in various ways, all of us on panels have been addressing parts of the how. It is fundamental to achieving sustainable peace that the how is deeply thought through, as my sister Lema just said. When I think of the culture of violence, that is another layer that was alluded to yet not touched upon when we were talking about the layers of the US and the UK and Iran and Saudi Arabia and the UAE. It's the layer of men thinking that they're the only ones who know how to do it, right? Voices of women are not important. The men carry the guns, ergo, women have nothing to say in peace. And that has to be addressed in some way, and I'm not saying in the context of solving the issue of Yemen, but women, as we are seeing over and over and over again, are increasingly sick of having to ask men if we have a place at the table. And everybody who has talked about the how, in a meaningful way, in my view, has recognized that if you do not involve all segments of society in some meaningful way in the dialogue, discussion, implementation of peace, you will not have peace. Ultimately, you will return to war. In my experience in El Salvador, it was a proxy war between the Soviet bloc and my country, it was Ronnie Reagan drawing the line against communism in Central America before they entered Harlingen, Texas, and took over America, which was ridiculous. There was only one operating elevator in Nicaragua at the time. I mean, how they were going to intervene and invade us was beyond my comprehension. Finally, the war came to an end, not because anybody won, but because the Soviet Union collapsed and the US didn't need its proxy war anymore. So the peace agreement in Salvador, and of course, some gentleman said you should just sit down the 8 most important dudes with guns. He didn't say it this way. Dudes with guns, let them sort it out. That's what they did in Salvador, essentially, and I think they've done it in most peace agreements, right? You bring all the men who have waged the war together so they can figure out how they're going to divide power. Let's take away I have a little more power than you, so I'm taking more of your guns, the whole shtick. So 3/4 of the document of the peace accord of El Salvador was how you do that. How do you get the opposition guerrillas into camps? How do you then take away their guns? How do you try to retrain them to be wonderful citizens of a war-torn society? And the other elements, and they said this essentially in the last couple of pages, all those other socioeconomic trauma questions, we'll deal with that after the peace. Because you can't really talk about those peripheral issues if you don't have peace. As long as you see the participation of women, youth, civil society, men who are not interested in shooting each other, if you do not include them in the process at the time you're negotiating it, I believe you are really setting up the situation for a future conflict, sooner or later. Peace is not, as you said, the mere absence of war, and any of us who work in war know that. The absence of war is the precondition for the possibility of sustainable peace with justice and equality. And that, don't waste time.
Jody,
Thank you.
I just want to touch on an issue, but very quickly if I can, because I do want to move on again. But another thing that you believe is that peace should be defined by human security, not national security. I just wonder how realistic that is, given the context of today's realpolitik and the U.S. relationship, transactional relationship to many governments around the world, shall we say.
You know something? If you believe you cannot bring about change, you will not bring about change. I believe that when people come together with a common vision, we together can change the world. It may not happen in my lifetime because I am old, but I am willing to participate in the process so that someday it will be different. I think people are fed up with the notion that national security is the most important form of security, right? In my own country, if I go to the parts of the country that are ravaged by the collapse of the manufacturing sector, they have no future, their children leave because there are no jobs, and I say to them, are you feeling secure? They're not gonna say, oh God, I'm worried about North Korea and their nukes. They're gonna say, I can't feed my, what's left of my family. My children had to leave because there are no jobs. If I get sick, I die because I have no insurance and I have no money to pay for health care. That is real security. And if you want a stable society, you have to provide for the basic needs of the people of your country. And then, people get pissed off and do stuff, but it will not be the disenfranchised, the disempowered, the jobless, revolting against, an elite few who have billions while, I have 50 cents.
Yeah.
That's human security versus national security. Let's spend half, well, we spend 57% of the US budget on the military. And that does not include nukes, which is hidden in the Department of Energy. I could go on.
Yeah.
Imagine what we could do with that money.
And to add to that, in the last 2 years, apparently, according to the State Department, the U.S. has made $27.9 billion of foreign military sales to Saudi Arabia alone. And when you consider what's going on in Yemen, you wonder how much pressure can be brought to bear to change course.